There are some apologies that come too late. Not because they are meaningless, but because they carry the weight of years. This is one of those apologies. I am not speaking as a young man who still believes time will fix everything. I am speaking as someone who has lived long enough to know that silence can wound deeper than words. I have seen storms pass, but I have also seen people break quietly, while everyone around them stayed comfortable and calm. This message is not loud. It does not rush. It comes slowly, the way truth does. When you have carried it inside your chest for decades. This is for the moment. When you were screaming inside, and I chose silence. You were screaming, but not with your voice. You screamed with your eyes, with your exhaustion, with the way your shoulders drooped, as if life itself had become too heavy. And I saw it. That is the hardest truth to admit. I saw it. I noticed how you laughed less, how your words became shorter, how your presence felt like someone standing at the edge of something dangerous. But I told myself lies. I said, they'll be fine. Everyone goes through this. It's not my place. Silence is very polite. It never interrupts. It never causes discomfort. And that is why it is so cruel. I did not stay silent because I didn't care. I stayed silent because I was afraid. Afraid of saying the wrong thing. Afraid of opening wounds I didn't know how to heal. Afraid of responsibility. At this age, you realize something painful. Silence is often disguised as wisdom. We call it patience. We call it giving space. We call it not interfering. But deep down, it is fear wearing a respectable face. And while I was protecting my comfort, you were fighting for your breath. You were strong. Too strong. Strong enough that people assumed you didn't need help. Strong enough that your pain looked organized. But strength can become a prison when no one checks on the prisoner. I now understand something I did not understand before. Strong people don't ask for help because they've learned no one comes. And when someone like that finally breaks, the world says, we had no idea. That is not ignorance. That is neglect. I should have said, I see you. I'm here. You don't have to explain everything. You don't have to be okay today. Instead, I said nothing. And silence does something dangerous. It tells the suffering person that their pain is invisible. Over time, they stop screaming. Not because the pain ends, but because hope does. When you are younger, you believe regret is dramatic. When you grow older, you realize regret is quiet. It sits with you in the evenings. It visits you when you remember faces. It asks questions you can't answer anymore. I regret not standing beside you when your world was collapsing. I regret choosing peace over compassion. I regret thinking silence was neutral. Silence always takes a side. Your pain did not disappear. It changed shape. It became distance. It became cold smiles. It became walls I didn't know how to climb. And years later, I finally heard your scream. Not in your voice, but in the consequences. Broken trust. Emotional scars. A version of you that never fully came back. Some damage does not shout. It whispers forever. If you are listening to this, and someone comes to your mind, do not ignore that feeling. Do not wait for the perfect words. Presence is more important than precision. Sit with them. Listen without fixing. Stay even when it's uncomfortable. Because one day, you might be where I am. Speaking apologies to memories. If you ever wondered whether anyone noticed, I did. If you ever felt unseen, that was my failure, not your worth. Your pain was real. Your struggle mattered. You were never weak for feeling it. And if my silence taught you to survive alone, I am sorry. You deserved support, not observation. Here is the truth that comes with age. You don't regret the arguments you had. You regret the moments you didn't show up. You regret the calls you didn't make. The silence you thought was harmless. The love you assumed was understood. Time does not heal everything. Sometimes, it only makes the apology heavier. Silence does not arrive suddenly. It settles in slowly, like dust in an unused room. At first, it feels harmless. You tell yourself you are giving space, that you are respecting boundaries, that you are being mature. But silence, once practiced, becomes a habit. And habits stop asking questions. I became good at being quiet. Too good. I learned how to nod without listening deeply. How to notice pain and walk past it politely. How to convince myself that not getting involved was a sign of wisdom. But wisdom without compassion is empty. And silence, repeated often enough, becomes abandonment. There comes a moment in life when denial can no longer protect you. For me, it was not dramatic. It was quiet. I saw the way you no longer explained yourself. The way your voice had lost its fight. The way you stopped expecting understanding. That is when I knew. People don't stop talking because they are healed. They stop talking because they are tired. And I realized you had stopped screaming. Because screaming into silence breaks something inside a person. That was the moment I understood. My silence had cost you more than I was ever willing to admit. When you grow older, you stop pretending your past versions were innocent. You see yourself clearly. Not as a villain, but not as a hero either. I see a man who chose comfort over courage, who avoided emotional risk, who thought time would soften everything. Time does not soften neglect. It hardens it. I was present physically, but absent when it mattered. And absence does not require distance. It only requires indifference. One of the greatest excuses we tell ourselves is this: they didn't ask for help. As if pain always comes with a formal request. As if suffering waits for permission. You did ask. Just not in words. You asked with silence between sentences. With exhaustion in your eyes. With the way your spirit leaned instead of stood. But I was waiting for clarity. When what you needed was courage from me. Sometimes people don't ask for help because they are afraid. The answer will be silence. You carried more than anyone knew. Responsibilities that didn't belong only to you. Expectations that never gave you rest. Emotional wounds you didn't have the strength to explain. And I watched. I told myself you were strong enough. That life was testing you. That struggle builds character. But struggle without support builds walls, not character. And every wall you built was another place. I failed to reach you. In your younger years, your conscience whispers. As you grow older, it speaks louder. It reminds you of faces you ignored, moments you postponed, words you swallowed. It asks uncomfortable questions late at night. What if your voice could have changed something? What if presence would have been enough? I have no answers for those questions. Only the weight of them. And the older you get, the heavier unanswered questions become. I once believed that silence kept things calm. Now I know better. Silence does not mean peace. It often means pain has learned to hide. It means conversations never happened. Truths were never spoken. Healing never started. Peace requires honesty. Silence avoids it. And by choosing silence, I chose delay over healing. For both of us, there is a version of you I will never know. The version that might have existed if someone had stood beside you when you were breaking. A softer version. A more open version. A version that didn't learn to survive alone. Silence doesn't just hurt people. It steals possibilities. And that loss is something time cannot return. I wish you had known that your pain was not a burden. That speaking up would not have made you weak. That needing support did not reduce your worth. I wish you had known that someone should have said, "Stay. Don't disappear." I'm listening. But wishing does not rewrite history. It only sharpens regret. Time is not as generous as it appears. People don't wait forever to be understood. They adapt. And adaptation often looks like distance. If someone in your life is quieter than before, do not assume they are fine. Ask. Sit. Stay. Because one day, silence will be the only answer left. Some apologies are not spoken once. They live inside you. They surface in memories. They repeat themselves in quiet moments. They never fully leave. I'm sorry I stayed silent when you were screaming. It is not a sentence. It is a confession. And confessions like this do not end easily. Loneliness does not always look like being alone. Sometimes it looks like being surrounded by people who never ask the right questions. You learned to wear your loneliness well. You showed up. You smiled when required. You carried conversations while carrying pain. And I mistook your functioning for your healing. But surviving is not the same as living. When someone learns to carry loneliness quietly, it means they tried reaching out once and were met with silence. People don't always leave by walking away. Sometimes they leave emotionally, long before their body goes. You were still there, but something had already withdrawn. Your eyes held less hope. Your words held less warmth. Your presence felt careful, guarded. And I thought this was maturity. But it was protection. Silence taught you that vulnerability was unsafe. And I helped teach that lesson. By saying nothing, we excuse absence. By calling it busyness, we say life is demanding. Responsibilities are heavy. Time is limited. But care finds time. What we really mean is, we chose our comfort first. You needed presence, not solutions. And I was too busy protecting my routine to disturb it with your pain. That truth is not easy to carry. As the years pile up, your struggle forced me to see parts of myself I did not like. It reminded me of my own fears, my own unspoken wounds, my own unresolved regrets. And instead of facing them, I turned away from you. Sometimes we avoid others' pain because it reflects our own. Silence becomes a shield. But shields also block connection. And in protecting myself, I lost you. Age brings memory. Not the kind that fades, but the kind that sharpens. I remember pauses in conversation where I could have spoken. Moments when your voice changed, and I ignored it. Times when one honest question might have opened a door, but I stayed quiet. And now those moments return, uninvited, asking why I chose silence over humanity. Silence is not explosive. It is corrosive. It eats away at trust slowly, at connection quietly, at hope without warning. You did not break suddenly. You eroded. And erosion is harder to notice until something collapses. By the time I understood, you had already learned how to stand alone. And once someone learns that, they rarely unlearn it. I should have listened without correcting you. I should have stayed, even when it was uncomfortable. I should have accepted that I could not fix everything. Presence was enough, but I believed silence was safer than imperfect support. Now I know better. Support does not require answers. It requires courage. And courage was something I lacked in those moments. There comes a time when you stop making excuses for who you were. You don't soften the truth anymore. You don't rewrite history to feel better. You accept your failures as they are. This is one of mine. I stayed silent when someone needed a voice beside them, and no explanation changes that fact. Silence creates space, not physical distance, but emotional absence. That space grows wider with every unspoken word. Soon, conversations feel forced. Connection feels fragile. Trust feels cautious. And you wonder, when things changed. They changed. The first time silence replaced care. This apology does not demand forgiveness. It does not rush healing. It does not expect reconciliation. It only speaks truth. I am sorry. I stayed silent when you were screaming. If nothing else, let this be heard. Some truths arrive late, but they still matter. There is a painful realization that comes with age. Understanding that you were present, but not involved. I witnessed your struggle. I observed your pain. I noticed the changes, but I did not step in. I stayed on the side of awareness instead of action. Being a witness feels responsible. It feels informed. It feels safe. But witnessing without compassion is still neglect. You didn't need someone to understand your pain intellectually. You needed someone to stand inside it with you. There were days when you didn't need advice. You needed someone to sit in the silence with you. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of presence. Someone who didn't rush you to heal. Someone who didn't minimize your struggle. Someone who didn't disappear when emotions became heavy. I should have been that person. Instead, I left you alone with thoughts that were already too loud. Loneliness does not hurt because no one is around. It hurts because no one stays. I heard your words, but I did not listen to your meaning. Listening requires effort. It asks us to slow down, to make room for discomfort. Hearing is easy. It requires nothing. I responded to sounds, not to signals. Your pauses, your tone, your tiredness, all of it spoke. And I chose convenience over connection. That choice echoes longer than I ever imagined. Silence is a teacher. Unfortunately, its lessons are harsh. It taught you not to expect too much, not to trust easily, not to depend. It taught you that opening up often leads to disappointment. And I was part of that lesson. When someone learns self-reliance out of necessity, they rarely unlearn it through words. It takes consistent presence. And by the time I understood that, you had already built your walls. This regret does not announce itself. It does not demand sympathy. It does not ask to be noticed. It simply stays. It appears in quiet mornings, in slow evenings, in moments when life finally slows down. I should have been there. That thought follows me, not as punishment, but as truth. And some truths do not conclude. They continue. This is where the silence ends. Not because everything is healed. Not because the past can be rewritten. But because truth deserves a voice. Even if it arrives late. I stayed silent when you were screaming. And I understand now. That silence is not neutral. It shapes people. It changes relationships. It leaves marks that time does not erase. If I could return to those moments, I would not search for perfect words. I would simply show up. I would listen more than speak. I would stay when it felt uncomfortable. I would choose presence over distance. But life does not offer rehearsals. It only offers understanding, often after the damage is done. So this apology does not ask you to forget. It does not ask you to forgive. It only asks to be heard. Your pain mattered. Your silence was not weakness. Your struggle was real. And if my silence taught you to survive alone, then let these words at least say this. You were never invisible. You were never overreacting. You were never wrong for needing someone. Some apologies come too late to change the past, but not too late to honor the truth. This is mine, and this time, I am not silent.